The dim glow of the screen lit up the faces of millions as they scrolled through their social media feeds, sipping their morning coffee or winding down after a long day. But one post stood out from the usual noise, bold, unmistakable, and dripping with controversy. It was a social media post from former President Donald Trump, urging his supporters to give Anheuser-Busch a second chance. At first glance, it seemed like an odd choice of words, coming from a figure who rarely minced them. But as the internet buzzed and speculated, something deeper was unfolding, something far more strategic. You see, this wasn't just a random plea for forgiveness or a nostalgic nod to a brewing giant's iconic history. The timing was deliberate. Earlier that same week, the Ultimate Fighting Championship had taken center stage with an unexpected announcement that had nothing to do with octagons or knockouts but everything to do with beer. Anheuser-Busch, the brand once synonymous with American tradition, was making a high-profile return as a UFC sponsor, attempting to mend fences after a period of backlash that had left their reputation bruised and battered. For months, the company had struggled to shake off the fallout from a polarizing campaign that alienated swaths of its core customer base. Beer sales plummeted, memes spread like wildfire, and the public seemed to have made up its mind. But in a world where nothing stays stagnant for long, the UFC partnership marked a bold gamble, an effort to rebrand, to reconnect, and most importantly, to reclaim lost ground. And now, with Trump's post amplifying the conversation, the stakes were higher than ever. But the question remained, why? Why would someone like Donald Trump, known for his sharp critiques and unwavering stance, suddenly vouch for a corporation that had been at the center of such controversy? Theories began to swirl faster than the foam on a freshly poured pint. Some said it was a calculated move to appeal to the middle ground ahead of the 2024 election. Others speculated about deeper ties between the former president's camp and the brewing giant's corporate interests. And then there were those who believed this was yet another chapter in the intricate dance of power, money, and influence between politics and sports. As the hours turned into days, the story refused to die down. Social media lit up with heated debates, hashtags trended globally, and late-night talk shows couldn't resist weighing in. For Trump's supporters, this was an opportunity to flex their loyalty, to rally behind the man who had always positioned himself as a champion of the American worker and cultural values. For his detractors, it was fuel for the fire, a chance to question his motives and dissect every word of his post. But it wasn't just the public that was paying attention. In the boardrooms of Anheuser-Busch, this sudden surge of attention was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it was a golden opportunity to rebuild their brand, to capitalize on the massive platform provided by the UFC and Trump's endorsement. On the other hand, it was a tightrope walk. The very thing that could reignite their sales might also alienate a different segment of their audience, one already skeptical of their recent missteps. And then there was the UFC. The organization, known for its unapologetic style and commitment to showcasing raw, unfiltered talent, found itself caught in the crossfire of a cultural storm. Fighters were asked for their opinions at press conferences. Fans debated whether they should embrace or boycott the sport's new sponsor. Dana White, the UFC president, was uncharacteristically silent, perhaps calculating his next move in a game where every decision carried significant consequences. Behind the scenes, tensions simmered. The UFC's locker rooms buzzed with whispers of how this partnership might change the sport's culture. Would the fighters become unwitting pawns in a larger narrative? Would the UFC's famously loyal fanbase feel betrayed by what some were calling a sellout move? And perhaps most importantly, was this partnership really about beer, or was it about something much bigger? As the story continued to unfold, one thing was clear: this was no ordinary business deal. It was a collision of worlds, politics, sports, and corporate America, each vying for control of the narrative. The stakes weren't just financial, they were cultural. The outcome wouldn't just affect sales or ticket numbers, it could reshape the way millions of Americans saw themselves, their values, and the brands they chose to support. And yet, amidst all the noise, one question hung in the air, unanswered and unsettling: what was the end game? What lay behind Trump's unexpected post and the UFC's high-stakes partnership? Was this the beginning of a redemption arc for Anheuser-Busch, a savvy political maneuver, or something far more calculated than anyone could have imagined? The answers, it seemed, were just out of reach. But as the UFC's next event loomed on the horizon, promising action both inside and outside the cage, one thing was certain: the fight was far from over. The UFC's next event arrived with a buzz that couldn't be ignored. Fans filled the arena, their energy vibrating through the air, the familiar sounds of the octagon echoing as anticipation built for the fights. But there was something different this time. The Anheuser-Busch logo was now emblazoned across every corner of the venue, on fighters' gear, on banners hanging above the crowd, and even in the pre-fight promos. The world was watching. The stakes had never been higher, and as the lights dimmed and the fighters prepared for battle, it felt like the fight for America's cultural soul was about to take place right before everyone's eyes. Behind the scenes, a quiet tension simmered. Dana White, usually a force of nature in the public eye, was noticeably absent from most of the press events leading up to the fight night. The whispers in the locker room were growing louder. Was this UFC's way of bowing to corporate influence? Were the fighters just pawns in a game they had no say in? Some were already voicing their discomfort with the sponsorship, concerned it would cheapen the sport. Others, however, saw it as an opportunity to make even more money and possibly elevate their brand to a global stage. The divide was growing wider by the second. And then, the moment that had everyone on edge arrived. The first fight of the night began, and as the fighters traded blows, something unexpected happened. The broadcast cut to a shot of Trump, sitting in the VIP section with a clear view of the octagon, smiling and applauding. He had been quiet since his initial post about giving Anheuser-Busch a second chance, but his presence now was undeniable. Fans erupted into mixed cheers and boos, unsure whether to praise or jeer. The camera zoomed in on him, showing that iconic smirk, as if he were watching an elaborate chess match unfold. Then, just as the fight reached its climax, with the crowd at the edge of their seats, Trump's phone rang. His expression changed in an instant. The camera didn't catch it all, but it was clear that the conversation was urgent. A series of hurried gestures followed, signaling a shift in the air. Trump's demeanor turned more serious, the smirk replaced by something far less confident. Was this all part of the plan? Or had something gone terribly wrong? Behind the scenes, chaos was unfolding. Anheuser-Busch executives were pacing nervously, their eyes glued to their phones as their social media accounts began to light up with hostile comments. The backlash from their sponsorship deal with UFC wasn't just about politics anymore, it was about consumer loyalty. It wasn't just the beer drinkers, it was the very fabric of their identity that was being questioned. How far could the company stretch before it snapped? As the night progressed, the tension mounted, and finally, the last fight of the evening began. The crowd roared in anticipation. Fighters clashed, the energy building to a fever pitch. But amidst the chaos, a startling announcement came from the UFC's PR team. "We've just been informed," the voice echoed through the arena, "that a major shift is taking place. The sponsorship deal between Anheuser-Busch and UFC is under review, effective immediately." The crowd went silent for a moment, unsure if they had heard correctly. Then, a wave of confusion and disbelief spread across the arena, followed by murmurs of surprise. It was happening. The deal was being questioned, and the public outcry had forced a change that no one saw coming. Just as the audience tried to process the shocking news, the camera once again cut to Trump. But this time, his reaction wasn't what anyone expected. He stood up, his expression unreadable, and slowly walked out of his seat. The whispers began again, but this time, they weren't about Anheuser-Busch or UFC, they were about Trump's next move. Was he distancing himself from the controversy, Or was this the beginning of a new chapter in the unfolding saga? It was a stunning turn of events. The very post that had ignited the firestorm now seemed to have triggered something far more explosive than anyone anticipated. The fallout was still unfolding, but one thing was certain: the UFC, Anheuser-Busch, and Trump were all players in a game that no one truly understood. And as the lights in the arena flickered for a moment, a new message appeared on the screen. The future of the UFC's sponsorship will be decided tomorrow. The words sent a chill through the crowd. Tomorrow. Would it be a return to normalcy, or would the game be changed forever? The next morning, the world was holding its breath. What would happen next? The announcement had left fans, media outlets, and corporate executives alike on edge. The tension in the air was palpable, and no one knew for sure which direction the story would take. UFC fans were still buzzing, dissecting the events from the night before. Some believed this was a temporary hiccup, a small moment of doubt that would soon be forgotten. Others saw it as a watershed moment that could change the very nature of sports sponsorships, politics, and the ways in which brands tried to shape culture. But above all, everyone was waiting to hear what would happen next. Trump, who had walked out of the arena the night before, made his next move on social media, as expected. The tweet hit like a bombshell. It was simple yet powerful. When big businesses get involved in politics, they forget who really supports them. Don't let them push us around. Anheuser-Busch, good luck, but I stand by the working class. It was a message that echoed through the hearts of his base. The language was blunt, no nonsense, and reflective of the political climate that had helped elevate him to where he was. But even more than that, the tweet seemed to send a signal that Trump had no intention of backing down from his previous statements about the beer company's need for a second chance. It was the kind of statement that fueled the fire of the divide between the political right and left, the corporate world and the everyday worker. It was exactly the kind of message that had gotten Trump into power in the first place: his ability to speak directly to the people who felt unheard, who felt like they were being left behind by the establishment. But was it enough to make a real difference in the world of UFC and Anheuser-Busch? As the day wore on, Anheuser-Busch released a statement of their own. The message was crafted carefully, walking a fine line between acknowledging the backlash and maintaining a firm stance on their partnership with the UFC. They claimed that their sponsorship was about supporting sports, athletes, and the incredible fans who followed them, regardless of political divisions. They emphasized that they had learned valuable lessons from the past and were committed to rebuilding trust with their consumers. They even mentioned that some of their new initiatives would focus on reaching out to communities in ways that supported American values. But the response didn't land quite as they had hoped. Critics quickly called it a half-hearted attempt to save face, a corporate speak that lacked any real substance. They claimed that it was more about protecting their bottom line than about truly understanding the concerns of their customers. The debate raged on across social media and talk shows. Some applauded Anheuser-Busch for their attempts to make amends, while others saw it as another example of a company trying to please everyone and, in the process, pleasing no one. The UFC, in turn, had become an unwitting player in the middle of the storm. Fighters who were once focused purely on the physicality of their sport now found themselves embroiled in public debates about corporate sponsorships, political loyalty, and public image. Some UFC stars, who had remained silent during the backlash, began to speak up, but the opinions were all over the place. Some saw the deal as a chance to make money, grow the sport, and reach new fans, while others feared that the deal was poisoning the very spirit of the UFC: authentic, raw, and unapologetically independent. Dana White, ever the master of controlling narratives, called for a press conference the following morning. His face was stern, and there was a clear sense of resolve in his words as he stepped up to the mic. He didn't shy away from the controversy. Instead, he faced it head-on. "We've always been about doing things our way," White said, his voice steady. "UFC isn't about politics. It's about athletes. It's about competition. It's about the fans. But we understand that sponsorships come with responsibility. We'll listen to the feedback, and we'll make sure our focus stays on what matters, the fighters and the fans. His statement was measured, acknowledging the unrest while also asserting that the UFC would continue to push forward. White promised a reevaluation of the sponsorship deal in light of the public's reaction. He made it clear that the UFC would always prioritize its fighters and fans over corporate interests. But his words were met with mixed reactions. Some fighters felt that they had been overlooked, forced into a situation that they had no control over, while others applauded the UFC president for standing his ground. As for Anheuser-Busch, the company found itself at a crossroads. Their image had already taken a hit, but the question remained, could they recover? Could they rebuild trust with the very people they had lost? They knew that their brand wasn't just about beer anymore, it was about identity, loyalty, and a deep connection with their audience. A focus group was quickly called into action, and executives worked round the clock to formulate a strategy that would address the growing backlash while still pushing forward with their UFC sponsorship. The next week, Anheuser-Busch made another bold move. They announced a new initiative, a series of community outreach programs aimed at restoring their relationship with local working-class families. They committed to donating a significant portion of their profits to charities that supported blue-collar workers and veterans. It wasn't enough to quell the dissent completely, but it did signal a shift in their approach and acknowledgement that they had to earn back the trust they had lost. As for Trump, his political base remained solid. His post had resonated with those who felt left behind, and many believe that his stance on Anheuser-Busch had solidified his place as a champion of the working class. However, the larger implications of his involvement with the beer company remained unclear. Some believed his post was simply a strategic move to rally his supporters, while others speculated that it was part of a larger effort to build alliances within the corporate world. What was certain, though, was that his influence over the conversation couldn't be denied. With each passing day, the saga of Anheuser-Busch, the UFC, and Trump continued to unfold. The deal was no longer just about a beer brand or a sports sponsorship, it had become a cultural touchstone, a symbol of everything that was at stake in the ongoing battle for America's identity. As the dust began to settle, it was clear that the tension wasn't going anywhere. In fact, it might have only just begun. As the months went by, Anheuser-Busch saw a slow but steady recovery. Their brand didn't return to its former glory overnight, but they made meaningful strides toward restoring their image. The UFC continued to thrive, but the sponsorship deal with the beer company remained a point of contention for many. Fighters came and went, but the ghost of the controversy lingered, fueling debates over corporate influence in sports and the delicate balance between business and authenticity. And Trump? His post had been a flashpoint, a catalyst for a larger conversation about the intersection of politics, sports, and corporate America. Whether it had been a calculated move or an impulsive decision, it had accomplished one thing: it had captured the public's attention. But in the end, the full implications of his involvement with Anheuser-Busch and the UFC were still being felt. The story of the partnership, the post, and the fallout was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The lines between politics, sports, and corporate sponsorship had blurred in ways no one had expected, leaving everyone wondering what would come next. Would the UFC continue to navigate the murky waters of corporate sponsorships? Would Anheuser-Busch regain the trust it had lost? And what about Trump? Was this just the beginning of a much larger political strategy, or had he simply stirred the pot for the sake of stirring it? The answers were elusive, and perhaps they always would be. But one thing was certain: this story wasn't over. It was a chapter in a much larger narrative, one that would continue to unfold in unexpected ways. And as the world watched, the tension hung in the air, just waiting for the next twist in this dramatic saga.